What's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm hanging in. I'm doing all right. So
Good to hear.
I want to introduce you, but I told someone yesterday that you're making the best trouble in the DC metropolitan area right now.
Well, I appreciate that, bro.
That
I
was
really
my
do.
that was the way that I introduced you to someone who did not know anything about your background. So for people who don't know your background, if you could explain that to people briefly.
Yeah, so I'm a native Washingtonian. The past 20 years, I feel like I just been fighting for, those that are like me, people from here, people that are coming from marginalized circumstances, trying to be a beacon of hope and an example more than anything, and to bridge people that seem to be far apart. Amplify voices. And my work has been centered in men, women, and children impacted by mass incarceration, but also obviously dealing with violence interruption, homelessness, economic disparities, health disparities, gentrification, so on and so forth, and just a warrior for everything DC.
Right. Okay. So if I were to say then that there's a march going on today, 57 years later, and we are attempting to fight for a lot of the same things we fought for in 1963. Your thoughts about that, especially given that like this march is taking place in Washington D.C.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, I think it's great that we're commemorating the March on Washington. I think it's appalling that we're fighting for so many of the same things. I think that that was a watershed moment in a way that it, pushed forward the civil rights bill and all those things. But subsequently, Black people are very much in the same position, and then particularly the Native Washingtonian. People are doing maybe worse than what they were doing at the time of the original March on Washington, and so I think that we should be able to really focus in on economic empowerment for Black people, a wealth transfer to the Black community that will be sustainable, one that will lead to sort of us moving the needle. And really hope from that, I think a lot of our other issues can be addressed. But I think it's been a lot of symbolic things that have went on since the March on Washington as relates to Black people. We have some people that are doing incredibly well, and I think that has made us think that things are super different. But I think 2020 has really, really, truly shown us that not that much has changed. We got a lot more work to do.
Right. So as far as then speaking to the shift between what I think in 1963 was Black equality to where we are now in 2020, where we're looking at Black equity, because
Mm-hmm.
these are two similar words, but they are entirely dissimilar in so many other ways. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on that.
Yeah, I just think that statement is just spot on, and that's what we need. We needed it then, but I think at that moment the push was we thought equality meant equity, but it doesn't. And we can be quote unquote equal and we want, but when we don't have equity, we don't own anything, we don't have any control. And I think that's really in this country since we got here. That's been the dynamic that has continued to have us oppressed. And I think once we get equity, we can talk about equality. That we can be seen as equals, and I feel like that we can collectively move forward together, but right now there's been far too much suffering in the Black community, and that's nationally and locally. And I'm just one of the glaring stats for me is that white people, white Washingtonians specifically, live 15 years longer than Black Washingtonians. I just want people to really wrap their minds around that. We hear about the almost $90,000 difference in median income, but this literally equates to your mortality, right? And so
Right.
that I think more equity would lead to some of the changing of those realities, and it does, because many COVID has also shown us that, right? 70, I think
Right.
75% of the COVID deaths have been Black people, so a lot of that has to do with equity and economics and things of that nature.
Right. So okay. So you're a Black father. Got a
I am,
family. Making
sir.
it happen. So I wanted to ask you about the importance of generational wealth moving forward in Washington, D.C. Both of us, we're roughly the same age, which is the
Yeah,
thing I always like to tell people, and they're like, my God, because people presume that you're like 10 years older than you are because
yeah, I know, right? I know,
you've
right?
worked so hard for so long. And
I hope I don't look 10 years older
no,
than
you
I am, but
don't. You're
yeah.
the same way too, in that way as well. So God bless Black Don't Crack. It's a beautiful
Yes,
thing.
sir. Thank you, brother.
So as far as speaking to the notion of generational wealth and being a father and having a generation of children that will be, coming up under you, your thoughts about how Black people in DC can better articulate the goal of generational wealth for themselves and their families.
Yeah, I think it's something that is incredibly important. As someone who grew up and I live in the same house I grew up in, I've never moved, right? I've been on Hanover Place my whole life, and my grandmother left me the house that I'm raising my children in, and I intend my wife and I to leave the house to my daughters, right?
Right.
And that's essential. But I think at the cusp of gentrification in this city is that because of mass incarceration, all the premature death, war on drugs, all these things that was placed upon our generation, so many of the people that you and I, our peers, did not reach their potential, right? And so it made that dynamic that happened in my household or in my family, it made that very difficult for a lot of other families. And so people, when we talk about access to opportunities, this is what I'm thinking about. People can hold on to the wealth that they have if more black people were gainfully employed, if we had black businesses that were thriving. These things also was going to allow black families to hold on to their property, and generational wealth is the most important thing. And for black people out there, if you're listening, also we got to do wills. Like, that's so estate planning. These are the kind of things that we don't talk about, that I know through the Don't Mute DC movement, we had a conference and we were trying to
Right.
amplify that. The mayor's office on African American affairs trying to amplify that. It's super important to estate plan. But again, when you're talking about a lot of people that are poor and a lot of people or that are struggling, these are the type of things that they're not focusing on until it's too late. So I think, again, we need to continue to push for the positive generational wealth transfer in our community, and for us to be planning for it.
Right. So thoughts then about dealing with the notion of like, because you mentioned two very separate sides of DC. Like there's like DC that like is high above it. It's perfect because it works right across that median household income. Thought about DC. There's people in DC that are like far exceptional past that number, and then there are people that are far beneath that number. So how do you create a situation where these two different sides of DC that we both walk in all the time and talk in all the time, how do you create conversation and brotherhood, sisterhood amongst two very disparate parts of a very, in that way, divided city? And it's a
Yeah.
frank question. It's one I've wanted to ask for a long time because
No,
I know
yeah.
you have an answer, and
Yeah.
we've been in the same rooms even, and I've
Right.
never asked you the question, but I always wanted to know.
No, I think first of all, that's a great question. And one of the things that I in my introduction, I talked about trying to be a bridge, and I really think it's going to take people that, like you spoke, like yourself, we organically, function in both sides of this city. And I think we have to continue to create safe spaces where people can just literally organically meet each other. I try to do that on Hanover Place all the time, particularly between some of my new neighbors and my people that grew up with me, right?
Right,
That may no longer live in the community, and be that bridge. Unfortunately, it may not be enough of us, but we got to create those people that's from here, that thrive, that are able to live here and function here and serve as that translator, right? That serve as that bridge. It's not an impossibility, man. I'm a big believer that people are people. Sometimes you just need to know what you have, what and who you have in common. But I think that's a problem in these communities where, if it is a person that's been there a long time, typically it's a senior. And so the
right,
new millennial is not having that many conversations. They wave at the senior, but they don't have anything to talk about. I mean,
exactly.
that's just, how it is. So we got to
Right,
have the Washingtonian 45 and under to get in position where that person can be present, and that person can be in the same bar or the same restaurant or the same event. You understand? And
oh, of
those
course.
conversations can happen organically. But I'm hopeful about it, right? Because again, I feel like in my community, and then we've been able to model that. We've been able to show people when they come to Hanover Day, even people that used to live on the block a long time ago, and they see sort of this block party, but it's harmonious, right? And there's people of all different backgrounds, right there celebrating in the same way that we did in 85 or 95. And so I think it's possible, but we must help the Native Washingtonian and Black Washingtonian that's 45 and under get into position in order to do that, though.
Right. So I also wanted to ask you, one of the things that I think is fascinating about DC uniquely is that we have things like that are intrinsically a part of our community, like gogo, for instance, to focus in on something that you and I both care deeply about, that could serve as a translator culturally
Mm-hmm.
for people, because music is one of those things that's a universal language. So I
Mm-hmm.
know that you have some background with current go-go movements in the city. So I wondered if you could speak to the importance of go-go as a sound, as a genre, and as a community activism piece.
Yeah, it's been described as sort of the heartbeat of the Washingtonian,
I
right?
mean,
And
it is.
It is,
I would
right?
say that. I would say
Yeah,
that.
I
So
agree
your
with that,
thoughts about
right?
that though?
And I feel like, culturally it's something that obviously that, we need to preserve. We need to share it too. And so, and I feel like we need to introduce it to people that move here, right? And I think, in as we celebrate that collectively, then that be like you said, it could be the seminal thing that bonds, Washingtonians, right? You've been here 5 generations, or you've been here for 5 minutes. I think, but it also we have to understand that in order for the purveyors of go-go, for the culture itself to really thrive, the people that practice that culture has to also do the same thing, right? So we have to understand that the people who culturally made go-go a thing has to be preserved also, if that makes sense. And through that, I think people will have a real glimpse into the true beauty of the Washingtonian, right?
Right,
How dynamic and amazing and beautiful people from this city are. You know what I mean? And how loving we are, how open we are. But if you show respect to us, we love you forever. And I think that's important. And speaking of go-go, why it's so such a, to me, such a beautiful example. The godfather of go-go is not a Washingtonian,
no, he's not, and
right?
people
You
don't realize
understand?
that. But it's one of those things that when you come to DC and you understand the community, people typically don't leave. Like that's a thing.
It's
That
a reason for that too, right? It's a
yeah,
reason for that, right? So it's one on one end, right? People come here to chase their dreams and opportunities, right? But
right,
all day and all the way back to whatever throughout time, people came here and they put roots here. They stayed. I think that speaks to what they feel when they're here. No matter what your background is, it's something about this city that's a beautiful thing, right? And the people from here, have a lot to do with that. And I just think we want to feel respected. We want to feel appreciated. You know what I mean? And so that's why I fight so hard, because we deserve that, right?
right,
We I feel like we deserve that. Just come and take your blinders off. Forget all the negative things that you may have heard about us as Native Washingtonians, and get to know us. You'll love us if you do that. I'm sure of it.
right. So, my final question, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about when you see things like last night, for instance. The RN, Donald Trump's speech at the RNC, on the White House lawn, and he is, as much as he's doing that, outside there's a go-go protest happening with multiple generations of Native Washingtonians, both black and white and brown, uh, on the streets, unified. And so much of what they were unified, using to unify, were things that were intrinsic to the DC community, especially the black community. So, your thoughts about seeing stuff like that, and your thoughts about things moving forward?
Mm. I was happy to see, and I continue to be happy to see Go Go, particularly coming out of the Don't Mute DC movement, to use it to push forward, uh, and be symbolic about positivity and love and togetherness, right? And using that sound to galvanize and organize and mobilize people, right, of all different hues, about good and what's right. Moving forward, I think I would love to see that same camaraderie, that same energy exists even within our neighborhoods, within our streets, on our metro system, in our legislative office, where we doing what we feel like we should be doing for the greater good of all people, right? And where we're including and inclusive of, the native Washingtonian, right? So
Right.
I look forward to people taking that energy, not just getting caught up in these moments, but understanding that for us to really, for our movement or our mentality to be pervasive and to stay and be sustainable, is that people have to do this every day. Can't just
Yep.
be something you do in the moment. You got to do it every day, and you have to live it. But I love to see, what GoGo is doing. Shout out to Yada Yada and Long Live DC, as well as, the Don't Mute DC movement, for knowing that we can use GoGo to move the needle in the community.
Right. So, before we get out of here, I wanted to get if people, where people could find you, and also mention the book that you wrote that I've read that's phenomenal, and just be able to like put all together and let people know where they can find out more
Yeah,
about what you're doing.
for sure. So, obviously social media, at Mr. Tony Lewis Jr., Mr. Tony Lewis Jr., TonyLewisJr.com. My book Slug: A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration, I feel like it's the most comprehensive look at the impacts of mass incarceration in our country through the lens of my life. And it's a beautiful thing to see the book and the success that it's had. To see it being used as a text in schools and in universities has been a true blessing. And I just hope people are inspired by it, educated by it, and empowered by it to know that, that no matter what you go through, that you can overcome things, and then you can be a beacon of hope for other people. So, and thank you for this, man. I really
Oh, no
appreciate it.
problem. Anytime. It's you. So this has to be done.
Oh my
So
God.
you can find me at Marcus with a C, K Dowling, Dowling on all socials. And Tony, thanks so much. And back to you, Claudia.